The next chapter I'm going to read from is on Marion Moran. Marion P. Moran, born February 4th, 1927 in Fond du Lac, grew up in a large Swiss family at the foot of Lake Winnebago, near the El Dorado Marsh. She graduated in 1945 from West High School in Madison and attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison for 2.5 years before dropping out. Disillusioned and not sure in what direction to go, she returned home to her recently divorced mother, who was caring for her younger siblings, to help run the household. Marion married for the first time in 1948 and spent the summer of the 1950 and most of the later 1960s raising 3 children, Sue, Beth, and Rob, in Chesterfield, Missouri. Throughout this period, she took neighborhood kids on nature walks into the Missouri River bottoms, where she began to develop a skill teaching others about the diversity and beauty of the natural world. She returned with her family to Madison in 1968, but the marriage did not survive. She was divorced in 1971. From 68 to 76, Marion worked as a naturalist for the Madison School Forest, a Madison School District, leading a program for children she called Come Walk With Me. She also led tours at UW-Madison Arboretum under the direction of naturalist Rosemary Fleming. In 1974, Marion became certified to teach natural history courses through the UW-Madison Extension System, and she had found her calling. Marion's UW Extension natural history courses, with their emphasis on ecology and Native American spirituality, became highly popular. These included walks on the wild side, learning together, and tracks in the snow. She also began a long association with a clearing in Door County and with Durwood's Glen Retreat and Conference Center in the Baraboo Hills, where she conducted weekday and week-long retreats titled Touch the Earth and Discovering a Sense of Place. Another popular session she led, called Spirit of the Land, occurred over a weekend at Upham Woods on Black Hawk Island north of Wisconsin Dells. And in the Baraboo area, she occasionally taught about Native American history and culture at nearby schools. I first interviewed her in '81, then later in '85, and then finally in 2001 in the Baraboo Hills. When Jean and I first moved here, this is a place called High Meadows in the Baraboo Hills, in August 1986, we had not yet walked the boundaries of the 83 acres of land. We feel we are only caretakers here. We don't own this land, and I've never felt that we do. In January 1987, a friend of ours came up and started walking the land with us. I had been hearing chainsaws up in the northeast corner. When I got up there, I heard the trees cry. To my great despair and shock, the entire northeast corner had been logged off, except for one oak tree standing in the middle. There were stacks and stacks of logs, and there were no words to describe the crying. It was a great, distressful, mournful sound with a heaviness in the air, and the stench was like the smell of death itself. Well, we found the post where the lots came together and found that this little logging operation had logged property to the north of us, but had come in way beyond the property line. So we came down after using ribbons extensively to mark the property lines, to make them obvious. We knew they'd be coming back. The skidder was still up there, as was the other heavy equipment. The next morning we walked up there, and these guys were very surprised to see another person. They asked me what I wanted. I looked where they had cut to make it look like they were within their... Let's see. They asked me what I wanted. I looked around and saw they had taken red spray paint and had sprayed within the area where they had cut to make it look like they were within their jurisdiction. So I said, We're here because you obviously have logged out trees that were not on the right property. They tried to point to the spray paint, but I broke down and cried. I quickly pointed to the posts separating the property lines. One of the guys looked at me and said, "Lady, why are you crying? They're only trees." There was no understanding. He told me that I would have to speak to his boss about it. I went up there almost every day to keep an eye on them. The good thing about that was that I began to know the land. I had never had the chance to walk up there before. I had not taken the time to do so. And what happened lay heavy on my conscience. I felt that I needed to do something about this. In the meantime, they had let the landowner know. One week later, on a Sunday, the log boss showed up on our door, and he was sorry for cutting some of our trees. He said, "I'm on my way down to Mass at Durwood's Glen. I would never do anything dishonest. You probably need to talk to Mr. Singer, the landowner, and see what you can do to get money from the trees." I told him that money wouldn't bring back the trees. And when we had bought the land, I had hoped that future generations might know the big oaks on the property. Coincidentally, through the mail came an article titled "Death of a Forest" in a Catholic newsletter about another situation. I sent it to the log boss along with photos of all the cleanup debris, beer bottles, booze bottles, oil cans that Gene and I found up there and after they had left. I still have all the old pictures. Nina Bradley, it's one of Aldo's daughters. Nina Bradley told me later that I could have gotten 8 times what the logs were worth through a lawsuit. And in retrospect, we probably should have sued, but we didn't have any money at the time for a lawyer. When the log boss got the letter, he came right to the house, said he would make it up to us someday and bring us a load of firewood. Well, one day his men brought us a truckload and sat here on the front lawn. They said, "You know, lady, we thought you were crazy, but you know, we have to make a living." I replied, "I understand, but if you're going to wipe out a big part of somebody's woods, you need their permission." We talked, and by the end of our discussion, I think they had a better understanding of how I could feel such a loss. One day in late March, a friend of mine came up, and I told her I wanted to take her up to the place where I heard the trees cry. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, and the sun was coming from the west. It was shining through the trees into the forest. Now, our property is long and narrow. You go through a meadow, some woods, and you come out into another small meadow, where actually we found an Indian crescent mound that a Madison archaeologist told us goes back to ancient times. So from that meadow, I looked up into the trees, and I see these gray-green round gossamer circles, concentric rings, different sizes like the growth rings of trees. And they're flowing and weaving through the tops of the canopy of what I now call the graveyard. They had cut down 800 trees on the property beyond us, plus ours. I looked down at the ground for a moment because I thought I was hallucinating. I looked up again, and they're still coming. But I didn't want to say anything to Bonnie because she knew I was emotional over the cutting. But pretty soon, her hand was on my shoulder, and she said, "Do you see what I see?" She was seeing it too. I told this story that summer, still not quite sure about what I saw. I participated in a workshop at the Sigurd Olson Institute. One night, we were at Ojibwe leader and Northwood College professor Joe Rose's lodge on the shore of Lake Superior. And Joe is also interviewed in the field in this book. He began to talk about animals and all the beings out there that have a right to life and who have this quality of life that we often fail to see. He asked if there was anybody in the group who ever had any experience of realizing the life forces of other beings. I swallowed a little bit and told my story. Afterwards, he looked straight at me and said, "Marion, I sense in you a great spiritual awareness. You were privileged to see the life forces behind. You were privileged to see the life forces leading the trees. And you did hear the trees cry." Even with this affirmation, I still was not sure. The next month, we were guests of former Sigurd Olson Environmental Institute Director Mark Peterson. That night, I told this story again. And there was another woman there who said, I have a feeling you still feel doubtful about this. I have to tell you that my husband quit the logging business because he couldn't stand the crying anymore.
Weary,